Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to our Aether Revolt pre-release primer. If you've watched one of these primers before in the past, this one's not going to be very different. It's really geared for newer players that maybe have never gone to a pre-release before and are wondering things like, what should I bring? What can I expect? That's what we're going to talk about today. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to talk a little bit about inventions and make sure, especially newer players, know what they are and what to look for, but I'll also give my thoughts briefly on each one. Having said that, quickly before we get started, if you check out the description below, you'll see some links to our Amazon affiliate store. You can make some purchases through that store, and if you do, a small percentage will come back to help support the channel. There's Aether Revolt products among many other Magic products listed there. Also, you'll find a link to our Patreon page, another way to help support us and help us keep doing what we're doing. So, having said that, let's get into the information for today. We're going to talk about, hey, what should you bring if you've never gone to a pre-release before, first off. And there's a number of things you want to think about. First and foremost, pen and paper, the most important. When you go to an LGS, a lot of times they don't have a lot of extra pens, so you either wait in line for a pen or else they'll sell you a pen. You don't need to be doing that, right? So you will need a pen to fill out registration forms a lot of the times, and if you've never played in a tournament before and you need a DCI number, there is a form you'll have to fill out for that. Also, paper is important to help keep track of your life total. Now, you will get a spin down life counter in your pre-release kit. However, in competitive Magic, the preferred way to keep track of life is pen and paper, and if you have any thought that someday you'd like to get into more competitive events, you might want to start to get into the habit of doing that sooner than later. That way, if there's any sort of discrepancy in a competitive event, judges can be called. They can kind of look and see how the life totals went along as the game progressed and where the variance occurred. Kind of helps them figure out what's going on for their decision. Next, sleeves for your cards. Very important. Tables and LGSs, not always super clean. You don't want to put your cards on it. They're going to start to get sticky after a few rounds. It's going to be really hard to shuffle them, and they even could potentially get damaged or marked, which is not a good thing in a tournament, right? So you're going to want to have sleeves. You're going to want to have some extra sleeves in case one breaks and you don't have to go and buy a whole new set of sleeves at the store, right? So think of this. You'll be playing probably a 40 card deck. You'll want a few extra sleeves. The picture you see there, it comes with 50 sleeves, so you'd get 10 extras if you bought something like that, for example. Now, playmats are great too. A lot of folks have playmats. They're spectacular, but they're another investment, and if you're playing in one tournament, you don't necessarily need a playmat just for that. Maybe down the road, that's something you might want to invest in. Extra dice is good too. Not only do they help you keep track of other stuff that's going on in the game, like +1/+1 counters and things of that nature, but it is kind of a faux pas to roll to see who goes first on a countdown dice, like the one you get in your pre-release kit, because all the numbers are in order. So usually more serious players will want to play on a randomized dice. Finally, I put deck box up there. Now, Aether Revolt does come in a deck box when you get your pre-release kit, basically. It's not a super sturdy one. It's basically cardboard, but it will at least last you the day. It is nice, though, to maybe have additional either deck boxes or binders to help sort out cards from previous events, especially if you're playing in numerous events and maybe you have cards that you're interested in trading away or something like that. It's good to have something else to carry them in or keep them in to separate them in your backpack. Alright, so once you do enter the tournament and they pass out the product, you're going to get this Aether Revolt pre-release pack. Inside, you're going to find a 20-sided die to help keep track of your life total. You're going to find an insert that gives you at least a few simple pointers on how to get started with building a sealed deck. You're going to find a Kaladesh sticker, which is kind of like the symbol you see on the left side of the box there. And you're going to get 4 packs of Aether Revolt, 2 packs of Kaladesh, and 1 premium foil, rare or mythic rare, from the set that is date stamped. You can use any of the cards from your 6 packs as well as that foil in your deck building. So you're going to build a minimum of a 40 card deck out of the cards you get from those 6 packs, and if you choose to, that foil as well. Now, once you open your Aether Revolt packs, one thing you're going to notice is there's some new mechanics. And there's 2 brand new mechanics, and there's a few mechanics that have come back to us from Kaladesh. Let's quickly take a look at those mechanics so you're familiar with them a little bit ahead of time. First, we have Revolt. This is maybe one of the most widespread and maybe exciting mechanics in the set, quite honestly. You're going to find Revolt in white, green, and black, and you'll find a lot of cards in the set that enable Revolt. Basically, what Revolt does is it triggers whenever a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. So that can look different for different cards. Sometimes you'll find a enchantment that has a revolt trigger. So whenever a permanent of yours leaves the battlefield, some way, shape, or form, it will give you an effect. In the case that you see on the screen, this effect will happen as long as a permanent you control left the battlefield, and then you play this creature. Once it enters the battlefield, then you'll get the revolt effect. In this case, it's getting an extra creature, a 1/1 colorless servo artifact token. Now, the revolt mechanic can give you a lot of extra economy out of your cards, but you do have to have ways to turn them on. So when you're building your deck, you want to think about that as you go. But what's nice about revolt is there's a lot of ways to turn it on. You could have a creature just die in combat, that would turn it on. But also things like flicker effects, or if you're able to sacrifice something, you could yourself send it to the graveyard, that will turn it on. Or if something gets bounced back to your hand, for example, there's all sorts of ways to do this, and they give you a lot of tools to work with in this set. Next we have Improvise, and this is a way to get spells to cost a little bit less by tapping your artifacts for generic mana. And this is actually a pretty powerful effect if you can cheat out some more expensive cards due to the fact that you have artifacts on the battlefield. Now, in the card we're seeing on the screen here, Sweatworks Brawler, you are going to have to pay the red with a actual red mana source. So maybe you tap a mountain to get that red. But after that, you're going to have the option of either tapping more lands to get the last 3 points of mana, or you can tap any combination of lands and artifacts you control. This is a way to perhaps get a creature out a little bit faster than you normally could, due to the fact that instead of having 4 lands, you could potentially have maybe 2 lands and 2 artifacts and be able to play a card like you see on the screen here, 3/3 with Menace. And that can be a very big advantage if you can pull that off early on. Keep in mind, again, when you play cards with Improvise in your deck, you're going to be looking for some cheap artifacts or maybe some artifact token creation to help enable them. Next, we have a returning mechanic, and that's energy. There's going to be plenty of cards that you come across that when they enter the battlefield or when you activate them could give you energy. Most of those cards, but not all, will also have something that you can do with the energy, and you see that as an example on the card that's on the screen here. Energy is repeating from Kaladesh, so you will find cards that will play well with energy in both the Kaladesh packs as well as your Aether Revolt packs. Basically, think of energy as a secondary resource. There are cards that are going to allow you to turn your energy into different effects. And finally, we have vehicles. Again, this is another mechanic that's back again from Kaladesh. And vehicles are artifacts. They are not creatures until they are activated with their crew cost or through another method. So, for example, if I played the card on the screen for 4, even though it has 4 power and toughness, it is not a 4/4 creature at this point. It cannot be hit for 4 damage and destroyed. It is simply an artifact at this point. Now, if I pay the crew cost, and that means tap any number of creatures you control with total power 1 or more in this case because the crew cost is 1, then the vehicle will become an artifact creature until end of turn. Once you activate a crew cost at that point, the card will turn from an artifact to an artifact creature. It can block, it can attack, and its power and toughness will be what you see in the corner of the card. So this one's a crew cost of 1. I can tap 1 creature that is power 1 or more to activate this. If it was a crew cost of 2, I could either tap maybe a 2/2 creature, or I could tap 2 1/1 creatures. Both cases, I would activate this and turn it into a creature. All right, let's talk a little bit about deck building. Now, a couple things right off the bat I wanted to get into before we go into the BREAD acronym is the fact that when you open your packs, you're building a 40-card deck, and first thing you want to think about is your land ratio. A good starting point is 23 spells, 17 land. That's going to be pretty much right most of the time. You can flex that maybe by 1 land either way based on your mana curve, but really start off by shooting for 17 land and 23 spells. Now, out of those spells, you want the vast majority of them to be creatures in a sealed deck, right? So for sealed, you're looking at minimally probably 14 creatures. You could go as high as even 16, 17, or 18 creatures. Your other spots are going to be reserved for things like your removal spells, which are very important, as well as any really good artifacts, enchantments, or even a planeswalker if you're real lucky that you may have opened. And you also want to keep in mind you want a couple spots maybe for some good vehicles too in this particular block. Now, vehicles, even though they do look like creatures, remember they aren't creatures, that it does take the resource of creatures to turn them on. So be really careful. You don't want to put too many vehicles in your deck. Just use maybe 2 to 3 of your best ones if you get some really good ones that you do want to play. So having said that, let's talk a little bit about bread. Bread is a way to kind of remember some of the key parts of the deck that you want to make sure are there while you're deck building. And let's jump in and talk about B, which is bombs. Now, bombs are your win conditions. I mean, these are your big cards that are going to be the big punch that are going to help you actually close out a game. You see a few different examples of these type of cards on the screen. Aethertide Whale is just a big creature that can just get in there as a flyer. It's a 6/4, but it also can give you a lot of energy for potential energy payout. Tezzeret the Schemer, of course, Planeswalkers are always going to be bombs. It doesn't really matter what they say. They just do so much. They have so much utility. They can really change the scope of the game. And finally, Exquisite Angels, another example. And again, you get yourself a 5/5 flyer, but it also has a really strong ability that changes the outcome of the game. Your opponent has to think about their goal a lot differently with this on the battlefield. That brings us to removal. Now, removal, very, very key in a sealed environment because a lot of times you're going to be matching up creature versus creature. And for your creatures to get across, 2 things are important. One we'll talk about in just a few moments, which is evasion. But another thing is removal, making a hole so that your creatures can get by and get to your opponent. So there's a lot of different examples of removal. You see a few here. Fatal Push is very, very powerful. In fact, one of the most powerful removal spells probably ever printed. If you happen to open one of these, definitely run it if you're in black. It's going to be very strong for you. But there's also other types of removal out there. For example, Caught in the Brights. It doesn't necessarily take the creature off the battlefield, but it does remove them from combat possibilities. And then finally, you have cards like Jacques, which are also very cheap, and they can damage a player, but can also remove a creature if need be. Next, we have Evasion. So again, you're going to want your creatures to be able to get by past your opponent's creatures, especially in a slow, grindy game, right? So a lot of your creatures that are your mid-range to later creatures, you want to make sure they have ways to get across so they have a big impact when they hit the battlefield. And there's a few different things to look for. Flying may be the most obvious, but also things like Menace, or in Outland Boar's case, Outland Boar can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. These are all examples of things that will allow your creatures to get by your opponent's creatures. Always important to look for when building your deck. Next, we have aggro. Aggro is all about the early game. So there's some decks that can really go all in with a lot of aggro creatures, but even just more balanced decks are going to want to think about having some small aggressive creatures early on that can round out your curve nicely and also get a few points of damage across in the early game. So you're looking for creatures like the ones you see on the screen. The first one being a 2/1 first striker for 2. Good chance that this is going to get across for some damage early on. A 3/1 for 2 in the middle there, also very good. And then Yahini, Undying Partisan, maybe one of the best examples of aggro. It costs 3, but it's 2/2, it's haste, it can attack fast, and as time goes on, not only can it get bigger, but you can also utilize some of your other creatures to protect it, which is very useful at certain times. Alright, and finally the D stands for duds. And duds doesn't necessarily mean a bad card. It just means cards in your sideboard that you chose not to play in your main deck for whatever reason. And the ones that are still in your colors, you could bring in certain circumstances. So all the cards that you see on the screen right now are cards that have very specific uses. Consulate Crackdown, as well as Natural Obsolescence, are really good if it turns out you're in a matchup against a lot of artifacts. So don't forget they're there. You may want to bring them in. Take into Custody, even though that's a very small effect. If you find yourself needing something to slow your opponent down, don't forget it's in your sideboard. You may want to bring it in. Alright, now that we talked a little bit about the mechanics and we talked about what you're kind of looking for when you're building your deck, let's talk about some of the synergies between the colors. Now, I will point out first off, when you're playing sealed, synergies are probably a little bit less important than if you're playing draft, or definitely if you're trying to build a constructed deck, right? But I think it is still important to kind of know what they are and look for, even if it's just a handful of cards that are going to synergize well together, kind of know what you're looking for in each color. So we'll go through the color combinations quickly and I'll let you know what those strengths are. First off, we have white and blue, and what you're going to find here is a couple things. First off, there's a lot of flyers in both of those colors, so sometimes you can just simply make a deck where you fly over your enemies. The other thing that these two colors do well together is white has a lot of revolt, and blue has a lot of ways to turn on revolt, so they complement each other very well in that way. White, black. Now, these two colors complement each other in some interesting ways. White can make a lot of tokens, small creatures, and black can sacrifice those creatures, or maybe in sometimes artifacts, to get different advantages. So that's something you want to watch for. Also, both colors dabble pretty strongly in Revolt. So those sacrifice effects from black can naturally enhance some of the white cards too. Boros colors, red and white. Now, both of these colors have a strong vehicle focus. They really want to play well with vehicles, and there's some synergies that you'll want to look for when you're playing in these colors. Maybe add an extra vehicle in if you feel like you can get some advantage out of it. Green and white, Selesnya colors, they're very good at taking those small creatures that white can create and finding advantages to making them better through things like +1/+1 counters and stuff like that. Green will have a +1/+1 counters matter sort of sub-theme to it, and they both also play well with Revolt. Blue and black, another unique combination. These are very similar in some ways that the white and blue cards act together because, again, blue doesn't have Revolt, but black does, but blue does have a lot of ways to turn it on, so that's actually pretty interesting. Also, you'll find there's a lot of ways for blue to create smaller creatures, maybe some small flyers that later can be sacrificed for other effects. Izzet colors, blue and red. This has kind of a dual focus as well. I mean, blue and red's always strong when it comes to control and direct damage, that type of thing. But you're also going to find a token generation theme in here. So Thopter tokens as well as servo tokens are created very easily in these colors a lot of the times. Simic colors, blue and green. Now, both of these colors are interested in +1/+1 counters. Green will grant +1/+1 counters and also give some effects that make your other cards better when you have them, and blue will help kind of bolster that strategy. Rakdos, red and black, they're all about aggression, and you see here right on the screen two very aggressive cards. You're going to find a lot of cheap creatures with evasion. Golgari, which is black and green. Again, you have green's way to build up counters and make things larger, and you also have black's ability to take those things, sacrifice them for value. Between the two of them, you can create some very large creatures with some very powerful effects. And finally, you have Gruul. And these two colors, which are, of course, green and red, they do some interesting things together. Green's creating a lot of energy. Red wants to spend a lot of energy. Red has a lot of small double strike powerful creatures that could use a boost from +1/+1 counters. Green can provide that. So you'll find a lot of cards that work really well together in these two colors. All right, finally, let's talk about Inventions. Now, if you're not familiar with these cards, basically they're a sub-series of cards that are very rare. You can get one potentially in every about 144 booster packs. So they're that rare. And these are beautiful looking cards. They're in foil. They have unique art to them. And because they're so rare, and they're all reprints of some of the most powerful artifacts really in the history of Magic. And they are very sought after. So some of them have a pretty nice price tag tagged onto them, and if you get a really good one, especially a really sought after one, it could be a very valuable card. So I think it's very important, especially if you're not familiar with them, that you know what they look like in case you open one and nobody tries to pull a fast one on you in a trade, right? So we're going to briefly talk about each one that you'll find in Aether Revolt, but keep in mind there's also a whole other series in the Kaladesh packs. So we talked about those in the Kaladesh pre-release primer if you're curious to see what those are, but today we're going to talk about the Aether Revolt ones, and we're going to start off with Arcbound Ravager. Now, this was one of the key cards from Mirrodin many, many years ago, and it still sees tons of play today in Modern as part of the Affinity deck. Basically, if you think of the modular mechanic, this is the core card that you think of, and because it is so popular, if you happen to open a Invention version of this, it can have a pretty nice price tag to it. Fantastic card to play with in Modern and to collect. Black Vice, this is one of the classic cards. Originally was printed in Alpha Beta Unlimited back when Magic started way back in 1993, and it has had its days where it has been powerful. In fact, it's been banned in Legacy for a very long time, recently unbanned, and it gets a little play there. It's not as powerful as it used to be in today's environments, but it's still a very interesting piece of history. Chalice of the Void, again, another one of the more pricey spells that you could potentially open. Very powerful card. As a matter of fact, it has been recently restricted to one in Vintage. Defense Grid. This is a card that sees some play in Vintage, and if you're in a control deck and you're trying to slow your opponent down, make their stuff cost more, even Moxes will cost 3 with this card in play. Duplicant. This is a real nice cube card because, especially if you're trying to make a powerful cube, some colors aren't as great at removal as others. This is a decent removal spell to pick up if you're in one of those colors in your cube, so you see it in a lot of different types of cubes. Engineered Explosives, probably price-wise the most valuable one that you'll find right now in Aether Revolt. This card is basically in every Modern sideboard out there at this point, right? So if you're playing Modern, you're very familiar with this card, and of course here's a foil version with very unique art, very sought-after card. Ensnaring Bridge, another popular Modern card that a lot of players who are at least into that style of deck are going to want to pick up to make that deck just look a little more exciting with a foil card with unique art. Extraplanar Lens. You find this one a lot in Commander. This is actually a really interesting Commander card and was desperately in need of a reprint, I think. Grindstone. Now, Grindstone and Painter's Servant is maybe one of the most popular combos that you find in Legacy, and as a matter of fact, Kaladesh gave us a Painter's Servant invention. So this lets you get the other half of the combo. Folks that are interested in putting together a tricked out version of this Legacy deck will probably want to get copies of this. Meekstone, another classic card, maybe not one of the high value cards financially, but another card that's from Alpha Beta Unlimited back in 1993. Next we have Oblivion Stone. This is a card that sees play in modern Urzatron decks. Now in recent years, some decks have switched this one out for All Is Dust, but considering Planar Bridge is a thing that some of these decks may be trying out sometime soon, that is a case to bring Oblivion Stone back into those decks. So just another card to watch out for with some interesting modern applications. Ornithopter. This is actually in the Aether Revolt set as a regular card, but this is another classic reprint. This card was originally printed in Antiquities, and the reason this is such a fan favorite card is not just because it's old, but this card always finds itself in the middle of some interesting deck builds. Back in the old days, it was part of the Fruity Pebbles deck. More recently, it was in Insult Artifacts, which is still very popular today in Frontier. So this is a card that always seems to find a way to maintain its relevancy. Paradox Engine. This is actually a card that was printed in Aether Revolt. So this is a new card that's already getting an invention version of it. And a lot of it is because it does feel like it's going to be a real powerful card, especially in Standard. There's already folks brewing some very potent Standard decks with this. Pithing Needle, another good modern sideboard card that we've seen over the years. Maybe not as much today. In value-wise, this isn't one of the big ones, but still sees play here and there. Planar Bridge. Now, this is another new Aether Revolt card that got an invention treatment, and like I mentioned earlier, I could see this showing up in some of the Urzatron decks in Modern. Platinum Angel. Not only is this just a fun fan favorite card that you see a lot of times in Commander and stuff like that, but the art on this really looks gorgeous. I think this will look incredible in foil. Spear of Resistance. Another card that makes cheap or even zero casting cost spells a little harder to pull off. Staff of Domination. This card's actually been part of interesting combos throughout the history of Magic. It's actually a very popular card in a lot of cubes nowadays. Sundering Titan. Now, this is actually a card that's banned in Commander, so do keep that in mind. Last time around, we got Primeval Titan in Kaladesh, which was also banned in Commander. But having said that, this is still a very popular fan favorite card. It's great in cubes, plays really well with Tinker. Sword of Body and Mind. Now, in Kaladesh, we got 3 of the swords. This time around, we're going to get the last 2. Sword of Body and Mind, though, probably the best limited sword. Now, what's interesting about Inventions is if you happen to open one of these, they are fair game to play in limited. So you can play this in draft, you can play this in sealed. They aren't going to be standard legal, though, necessarily, because they're only going to be legal in the sets that they're already legal in before they showed up as Inventions. So you can play this in Modern, for example, but not Standard. Having said that, though, if you happen to open this in your sealed pool, this card is going to be a beating. That mill effect is huge. Sword of War and Peace. Now, this is maybe constructed-wise a better card than the previous one, but it's still going to be really good for you in limited. Trinisphere, another card that showed up in Vintage over the years, makes things like even Moxes and Black Lotuses a lot harder to cast. Adelkin Shackles, another card that actually still sees modern play, very popular in Cube, can be a very powerful card in conjunction with blue. And finally, our last invention, Wormcoil Engine. This is sometimes considered the 6th Titan in the Titan cycle. Get yourself a 6/6 for 6 with Death Touch and Lifelink, and oh, by the way, if it dies, it basically just splits into 2 creatures. You get a 3/3 colorless worm that has Lifelink and one that has Death Touch. Really hard to get rid of, and it handles board sweeps incredibly well. Having said that, that wraps up the inventions. Last couple pieces of advice I'd like to give you before we finish up. One of which, if you are planning on playing in a pre-release, I probably would check with the LGS to see if you need to pre-register. Some of them do have limited amounts of pre-release kits as well as a limited amount of space, so it's important to kind of let them know you're interested in coming. Some of them will have sign-up sheets. Other LGSs, it won't matter that much because they have plenty of product and plenty of room, but check in with yours. Also, it's good to ask what kind of tournament they're running when you do check in with them, because there are different ways they could do this. Most of the time, they'll run a 4-round Swiss tournament. The idea of a pre-release is to be really casual and let you play all your rounds. Even if you lose them all, you're still able to play all your rounds, which is kind of nice. And then after the 4 rounds, you'll get a prize payout based on how well you did. So you'll get a certain amount of packs if you go 4-0, maybe a few less packs if you go 3-1-1, and maybe a few less packs if you go 3-1. And that's usually where the prize payout cuts, but that could change at different stores. Other stores will just do a 5-round Swiss event, and then they'll pay people based on 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, that type of thing. So the payout looks a little bit different. A lot of times in those events, you can get a bigger payout if you do better. Then I've seen some stores do some offbeat stuff. I've seen stores run pre-release events that cost more to get into, and they have a bigger prize payout, but those will typically have a lot less players in them. Or else on the flip side, they will really just give you an amazing prize payout, like give you like a box of Eternal Masters or something like that to the winner. And those will tend to draw a lot of extra players, which means they'll play a lot of extra rounds. And those could be really long tournaments. You want to be prepared for something like that, especially if you're playing at midnight, right? So there's all different types of things you could run into. Check with your LGS to see what format they're going to be going with. And my last piece of advice finally at the end is, hey, you know what? Have fun. This is all about having fun. Don't take it too seriously. Go in there, have a good time, play some Magic, talk with people, and meet some new people that maybe you can play with in the future. And that's really what it comes down to. It's not really about winning or trying to go 4-0, especially at a pre-release, right? It's just about having a good time. So I hope everybody gets a chance to go. I'm really excited to hear how your pre-release goes, or maybe if you get any crazy pulls or anything like that, definitely let me know. So until then, hope this helps you. Until next time, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.